What drives a young princess to reject the allure of worldly riches and dedicate her life to the love of Jesus Christ? The story of Saint Ursula transports us back to the 4th century, when a virtuous maiden of Cornwall chose martyrdom rather than betray her faith. Her testimony of purity and courage has inspired generations of Christians, especially young women devoted to their faith, showing them that true love for God can conquer any earthly fear. Chapter 1. The Origins of a Christian Princess. In the year 362 AD, as the Roman Empire underwent profound religious shifts, a baby girl was born on the shores of Cornwall in remote England, destined to shine brightly in the heavens among the saints. Her parents, Christian rulers of that ancient British land, received this gift from heaven with immense joy, because in times of political and religious uncertainty, the birth of an heir represented hope and continuity for the kingdom. Little Ursula grew up surrounded by her parents' love and the strong Christian upbringing that defined the converted nobility of that era. From her earliest years, her parents ensured she learned not only the virtues befitting a princess, but especially those that adorn the Christian soul: humility, charity towards those in need, purity of heart, and a sincere devotion to our Lord Jesus Christ. Morning and evening prayers resonated through the royal chambers as the young princess learned to find her greatest treasure in prayer. The kingdom's wisest teachers were summoned to educate the heiress, but always under the watchful eye of her parents, who ensured that no worldly teaching could tarnish the pure spirit that the girl displayed from an early age. The Holy Scriptures were her favorite reading, and she soon demonstrated a profound understanding of the mysteries of faith that astonished those around her. Her natural intelligence, illuminated by divine grace, made her an exceptional student of eternal truths. As Ursula grew in age and wisdom, her parents proudly observed how Providence had blessed their daughter with extraordinary virtues. Her physical beauty was remarkable, but even more beautiful was the beauty of her soul, which radiated the presence of God in her heart in every gesture and word. Courtiers commented in admiration how the young princess preferred the quiet of the royal chapel to the noisy courtly entertainments, and how her eyes shone with special brilliance when she participated in liturgical celebrations. During her adolescence, Ursula began to experience a particular calling in her heart, inviting her to a total surrender to the heavenly bridegroom. Without revealing this secret of her soul to anyone, she made a private vow of perpetual consecration to Jesus Christ, promising to keep her virginity as a pure offering to the Lord. This heroic act of surrender foreshadowed the glorious destiny that Providence had prepared for her, although at that moment the young princess could not imagine the trials that awaited her in the near future. Chapter 2. Beauty that awakened covetousness. The fame of Princess Ursula's extraordinary beauty began to spread beyond the borders of the small kingdom of Cornwall. Like the fragrance of flowers announcing the arrival of spring, travelers and merchants who visited the court returned to their lands carrying marvelous tales of the king's daughter's unparalleled beauty, describing not only her perfect features, but also the angelic grace that emanated from her entire being. These testimonies awakened the curiosity and desire of many nobles from faraway lands. Soon, emissaries from various kingdoms began to arrive at the royal palace, bearing letters of introduction and marriage proposals from princes and dukes. Eager to meet the famous princess personally, each embassy brought with it stories about the riches and power of their respective lords, hoping that such offers could sway the king's heart towards their candidates. However, Ursula's father, a prudent and devout man, was not easily dazzled by worldly promises, for he knew the infinitely superior value of the spiritual virtues that adorned his daughter. Ursula herself watched this procession of suitors arriving at her home with growing concern. Each marriage proposal represented a threat to her secret vow of perpetual virginity. and in the solitude of her private oratory, she raised fervent supplications to heaven that divine providence would deliver her from those worldly commitments. Her heart was already completely given to Christ, and the mere thought of belonging to another caused her indescribable anguish. However, being an obedient daughter, she never openly expressed her opposition to her father's plans. Courtiers began to bet on which of the numerous suitors would be chosen to marry the beautiful princess. Some favored the wealthiest candidates, others the most militarily powerful, and there was no shortage of those who preferred the youngest and most dashing. But amid all these human speculations, Ursula maintained her external serenity, although her soul was torn between filial obedience and fidelity to her commitment to the heavenly bridegroom. Her prayers became more intense and prolonged each day. The situation became complicated when some of the rejected suitors began to show their discontent in an increasingly threatening manner. The political alliances of that time were fragile, and the rejection of a marriage proposal could be interpreted as an offense justifying military reprisals. The king was in a delicate position, as he had to balance the interests of his kingdom with the well-being of his beloved daughter, without even suspecting the secret vow that enormously complicated the situation. The tension in the court grew day by day, while Ursula continued to trust that God would find a solution to her seemingly impossible dilemma. Chapter 3. The Pagan General's Proposal. Among all the suitors seeking the hand of Princess Ursula, none aroused as much political interest as Duke Cananus, an experienced general whose military influence extended over vast territories. This man, although a pagan, had proven to be a valuable ally in the border conflicts that constantly threatened the stability of the Kingdom of Cornwall. His marriage proposal was not accompanied solely by promises of wealth, but by concrete guarantees of military protection that the small Christian kingdom desperately needed in those turbulent times. Duke Cananus had built his reputation on military victories and political acumen, qualities that made him an indispensable ally for any kingdom wishing to maintain its independence. His armies were disciplined and loyal, and his military strategy had proven superior to that of many of his contemporaries. However, his adherence to the ancient pagan cults represented a considerable obstacle for a royal family that had embraced the Christian faith with sincere devotion. Nevertheless, pressing political circumstances began to tip the balance toward this alliance. When the formal proposal arrived at the royal palace, the king was faced with a decision that transcended personal feelings and delved into the realm of national survival. The royal advisors were divided in their opinions. Some defended the importance of maintaining the religious purity of the royal family, while others argued that the security of the kingdom should prevail over any other consideration. The deliberations lasted for weeks, while Duke Cananus patiently awaited a response, confident that his offer would be the most attractive from a strategic point of view. Finally, after lengthy consultations with his closest advisors and deep prayers asking for divine illumination, the king made the decision he considered most beneficial for his people. He accepted Duke Cananus's proposal, convinced that this matrimonial alliance could guarantee the peace and prosperity of his kingdom for many years. However, being a loving father and a devout Christian, he stipulated that the pagan general respect the Christian faith of his future wife and allow her to freely practice her religion. The Duke accepted these conditions without resistance, eager to seal the alliance. The news of the royal decision spread quickly throughout the kingdom, generating mixed reactions among the subjects. While some celebrated the prospect of an alliance that would strengthen national defense, others expressed their concern about seeing their beloved Christian princess united in marriage with a pagan. However, no one knew the inner drama that this decision provoked in the heart of Ursula, who saw how her secret vow of perpetual virginity came into apparent conflict with her duty of filial obedience. In the privacy of her oratory, the young princess intensified her pleas to heaven, trusting that Providence would find a way to resolve this painful contradiction. Chapter 4. 3 years of hope and prayer. Upon learning of her father's decision, Saint Ursula experienced a mixture of sorrow and hope, which led her to seek refuge in the most intense prayer. However, her natural wisdom and the gift from heaven that accompanied her inspired a strategy that could reconcile filial obedience with her secret commitment to Christ. With the humility of a true Christian, but also with the innocent cunning recommended by the gospel, she presented herself before her father to request a period of preparation before marrying Duke Cananus. Ursula's request was not unusual in those times, as young noblewomen frequently required time to prepare their trousseau and familiarize themselves with the customs of their future husbands. However, the princess had in mind purposes much higher than the merely mundane. She specifically requested 3 years of preparation, time she considered sufficient to attempt the conversion of her pagan fiancé, or, in case this was not possible, to find some solution that would respect both her vow of virginity and her filial duty. Her father, understanding this reasonable request, gladly agreed to grant the requested time. During these 3 years, Ursula displayed an intense spiritual activity that astonished even the most experienced religious figures of the court. Her days began before dawn with long hours of contemplative prayer, during which her soul immersed itself in the divine presence, seeking light for her difficult situation. Afterward, she devoutly participated in Holy Mass, receiving Holy Communion with a fervor that edified all those present. The rest of the day was dedicated to works of charity, visits to the sick and poor of the kingdom, and to the study of the Holy Scriptures and the writings of the Church Fathers. Parallel to this intensification of her spiritual life, Ursula initiated a delicate but constant correspondence with Duke Cananus, with the noble purpose of gradually introducing the truths of the Christian faith into his heart. Her letters, written with exquisite delicacy and profound wisdom, presented the beauties of the Christian religion without directly attacking the pagan beliefs of her recipient. She spoke of the peace she experienced in prayer, of the joy that charity towards the needy provided, and of the certain hope in eternal life that faith in Jesus Christ offered. Each missive was a true work of epistolary evangelization. Duke Cananus, an intelligent and pragmatic man, read these letters with growing interest, although without manifesting an obvious conversion. The virtues that shone through the words of his fiancée caused him sincere admiration, and he gradually began to show a more respectful attitude towards the Christian religion. However, the deep pagan convictions rooted in his mind since childhood did not easily yield to rational arguments and testimonies of virtue. Ursula persisted in her evangelizing efforts, trusting that divine grace could touch the general's heart, but at the same time preparing her soul for any outcome that Providence might ordain. Her 3 years of waiting were coming to an end, and neither of the two alternatives she had contemplated had fully materialized. Chapter 5. The Journey of the 11 Maidens. When the 3-year period agreed upon for the matrimonial preparation was fulfilled, Saint Ursula understood that the time had come to face her destiny with the serenity that characterizes souls truly united to the divine will. Although her evangelizing efforts had not achieved the complete conversion of Duke Cananus, she had perceived in him a more favorable attitude towards Christianity, which provided her with some comfort. However, her vow of perpetual virginity remained intact in her heart, and she trusted that Providence would find a way to honor this sacred commitment. The departure for the Duke's lands was organized with the magnificence befitting a royal wedding, but Ursula proposed a mode of travel that reflected both her noble rank and her spiritual inclinations. Instead of an overland journey, she suggested traveling by sea and river, allowing for a more comfortable and ceremonious journey. To accompany her on this adventure, she carefully selected 11 virtuous maidens from noble families, all of them Christian virgins known for their piety, who had been promised in marriage to 11 officers in Duke Cananus's army. These 11 traveling companions were not chosen at random, but represented the cream of the crop of young Christian women in the kingdom. Each had been educated in the same principles of faith and purity that had shaped Ursula's character, and all shared a sincere devotion to Jesus Christ and his Blessed Mother. The princess saw in them not only traveling companions, but sisters in faith who could support each other in the challenges that awaited them in foreign lands. Together they formed a small prayer circle that met daily to lift up their supplications to heaven. Spiritual preparation for the journey was as meticulous as the material preparations. Ursula organized spiritual retreats for the entire group, during which a holy priest instructed them on the virtues necessary to maintain faith in hostile environments. They practiced various forms of prayer together, memorized numerous psalms and sacred hymns, and mutually pledged to preserve their purity of soul, no matter the circumstances they might face. This period of preparation greatly strengthened the spiritual bonds between the 12 young women and prepared them for the heroic testimony that awaited them. Finally, the day of departure arrived, marked by solemn religious ceremonies and emotional farewells. The king blessed his daughter with tears in his eyes, sensing that he might not see her again in this life. Though without imagining the glorious destiny that awaited her, the ships prepared for the journey were beautiful and comfortable, decorated with the royal emblems and Christian symbols requested by the young travelers. As the ships slowly sailed away from the shores of Cornwall, Ursula and her companions sang sacred hymns, turning their wedding voyage into a true pilgrimage of faith. Their hearts held both the human hope for a blessed future and the supernatural confidence that God would guide their steps toward their eternal destiny. Chapter 6. Cologne and the Terror of Attila. The journey of the 12 Christian virgins initially proceeded under the best auspices, sailing through calm waters and enjoying favorable weather conditions that seemed to bless their voyage. The young women took advantage of the long hours at sea to deepen their spiritual lives, transforming the ships into true floating oratories where prayers and sacred hymns constantly resonated. Saint Ursula exerted a beneficial influence over the entire group, encouraging her companions when the fatigue of the journey threatened to discourage them, and keeping the flame of Christian devotion alive in every heart. When the ships entered the waters of the Rhine River, the travelers began to perceive disturbing signs that foreshadowed unexpected dangers. The inhabitants of the riverbanks fled in terror inland, abandoning their homes and taking with them only their most valuable possessions. The few merchants they encountered along the way told them with terror the news that was spreading throughout the region. The fearsome Attila, king of the Huns, had begun a new campaign of conquest that was sowing panic in all the cities of the Rhine Valley. His barbarian hordes advanced, destroying everything in their path, and showed no mercy to any population that dared to resist. As they approached the city of Cologne, the planned destination for a major stop on their journey, the signs of devastation became increasingly evident. Columns of smoke rose on the horizon, and the air carried the acrid smell of fires and destruction. The guides accompanying the expedition strongly advised changing course to avoid the besieged city. But Saint Ursula, after consulting with her companions and offering fervent prayers, decided to continue towards Cologne. An inner inspiration suggested to her that Providence had ordained that they arrive in that city precisely at that moment of trial. Upon approaching Cologne, the spectacle that presented itself before their eyes surpassed the worst fears they had conceived during the journey. The beautiful city, which had been a flourishing commercial center and an important Christian bastion, lay partially in ruins under the dominion of Attila's fierce troops. The towers of the churches had been desecrated, the markets were deserted, and a deathly silence spread through the streets that once bustled with activity. However, precisely in the midst of this desolation, the 12 Christian virgins felt that their presence there was no accident, but part of a divine plan that transcended their human understanding. When the ships docked at the wharves of Cologne, they were immediately surrounded by Hun soldiers who reported their arrival to their superiors. The news that a group of young, noble Christian women had voluntarily arrived in the conquered city quickly reached the ears of Attila himself, who ordered the prisoners to be brought before him. As they were escorted through the devastated streets, Ursula and her companions maintained a serene and dignified demeanor, praying in silence and preparing their souls for the encounter with the fierce conqueror. Their hearts harbored no fear, for they had placed their trust completely in the hands of divine providence and sensed that the moment was approaching for which God had prepared them throughout their lives. Chapter 7. The Martyrdom of the Bride of Christ. The encounter between Saint Ursula and the terrible Attila took place in the episcopal palace of Cologne, which the king of the Huns had converted into his temporary residence during the occupation of the city. When the young princess was led before him, the barbarian conqueror experienced a surprise that he had rarely felt in his warrior's life. Ursula's extraordinary beauty, enhanced by the supernatural serenity that radiated from her face, made such a deep impression on Attila that he momentarily forgot his usual ferocity to gaze in admiration at that creature who seemed to descend from heaven. However, the initial reaction of astonishment soon gave way in the heart of the Hun king to a disordered passion that completely dominated him. Accustomed to having his desires fulfilled instantly through force and terror, Attila believed he could easily win the love of this beautiful prisoner. Through a combination of threats and promises, he offered her immense riches, unlimited power over vast territories, and the chance to become queen of an empire stretching from the Asian steppes to the heart of Europe. His words revealed a mixture of sincere admiration and possessive desire, characteristic of his primitive nature. Saint Ursula listened to these tempting offers with a tranquility that deeply disconcerted the barbarian king. When Attila finished his speech, expecting a favorable response, the young martyr gave him a look full of compassion and replied in a firm but sweet voice that she was already betrothed to the most powerful of all kings on earth, Jesus Christ, Son of the Most High God. She explained that her heart belonged eternally to the heavenly bridegroom who had died on the cross to save all men, including Attila himself, and that no earthly wealth could turn her away from this divine love, which was the reason for her existence. Ursula's response provoked in Attila a rage as violent as his initial admiration had been intense. The proud conqueror, who had seen emperors and kings submit, could not tolerate the rejection of a young prisoner who preferred an invisible god to his tangible and terrible power. His face twisted with fury, and his words became threatening as he warned her about the consequences of her stubbornness. However, the more enraged the tyrant became, the more serene the holy martyr appeared, having found in the public confession of her faith the culmination of all her spiritual longings. When he understood that neither promises nor threats could break the will of this extraordinary young Christian woman, Attila experienced such a violent fit of rage that he completely lost control of himself. Personally drawing his sword, he beheaded Saint Ursula on October 21st in the year 383, thus fulfilling the holy martyr's glorious destiny to die for the love of Jesus Christ. In the supreme moment of her martyrdom, Ursula's face lit up with a celestial light that impressed even the barbarian soldiers present, who understood that they had just witnessed the death of a saint. Her 11 companions shared the same glorious fate, sealing with their blood the testimony of faith they had given throughout their lives. Chapter 8. The testimony of shed blood. The blood of the 12 virgin martyrs, spilled in the streets of Cologne for confessing the name of Jesus Christ, did not fall on barren ground, but immediately became the seed of new spiritual fruits, which began to manifest themselves in a prodigious way. The very Hun soldiers, who had witnessed the execution of Saint Ursula and her companions, were deeply impressed by the supernatural serenity with which the young Christian women had faced death. Several of them began to experience an internal unrest that led them to reflect on the faith that had inspired such fortitude in seemingly fragile and unprotected people. The Christian inhabitants of Cologne, who had managed to escape the massacre or who remained hidden in the occupied city, upon learning the details of the Holy Virgin's martyrdom, felt a hope rekindle in their hearts, a hope that seemed definitively lost. The heroic testimony of these young foreign women, who had preferred death rather than betray their faith, reminded them that the power of Christ was superior to any human tyranny, and that eternal life was an incomparably more valuable asset than temporary survival. This example of holiness restored their courage to persevere in their own faith, despite the persecutions. News of the martyrdom spread rapidly throughout the surrounding regions, carried by merchants, refugees, and soldiers who transmitted the stories with a mixture of admiration and amazement. In every place where these news arrived, Christians received them as a message of hope and strength, while many pagans began to take an interest in a religion capable of inspiring such heroism in its followers. The name of Saint Ursula became a symbol of invincible purity and unwavering fidelity to Christian principles. Some testimonies from the time relate that in the days following the martyrdom, various prodigies occurred that confirmed the holiness of the virgin martyrs. Several sick people who touched the saints' blood-stained garments with faith experienced miraculous healings, while other witnesses claimed to have seen celestial glows in the place where the martyrs' blood had been spilled. These extraordinary signs helped strengthen popular veneration for Saint Ursula and her companions, and many began to invoke her intercession in difficulties and tribulations. Attila himself, after a few days, began to experience remorse for having ordered the death of those innocent young women whose only crime had been fidelity to their faith. Although his hardened heart did not reach a complete conversion, the memory of Saint Ursula's supernatural serenity at the moment of her death accompanied him for the rest of his life as a silent but eloquent testimony to the power of Christian truth. This psychological impact on the terrible conqueror was interpreted by many as a first posthumous victory of the holy martyr over pagan brutality. Chapter 9. Veneration and worship through the ages. When peace finally returned to the lands of the Rhine after the retreat of Attila's hordes, the Christians of Cologne hastened to search for the bodies of Saint Ursula and her companion martyrs to give them a dignified burial and begin the official veneration of their memory. With profound emotion and reverence, they recovered the mortal remains of the holy virgins and moved them to an appropriate place where they could be venerated by the faithful. The Bishop of Cologne, upon returning to his see after the period of barbaric occupation, organized solemn ceremonies of translation and burial, which marked the beginning of the liturgical cult to the new martyrs. The construction of a church, specifically dedicated to Saint Ursula and her companions, became a priority for the Christian community of Cologne, who wished to possess a worthy sanctuary where they could preserve the relics of the saints and facilitate the pilgrimage of the devout. The construction efforts were fueled by the generous contributions of the faithful from all walks of life, from wealthy nobles to humble artisans, who offered their personal labor as a tribute to the holy martyrs. The resulting temple became one of the most beautiful in the region and a beacon of spiritual light, drawing pilgrims from distant lands. As the centuries passed, devotion to St. Ursula spread throughout Western Europe, propelled by accounts of numerous miracles attributed to her intercession, stories of extraordinary healings, special protection, and spiritual favors, granted to those who invoked the holy martyr, constantly multiplied, solidifying her reputation as a powerful advocate before the throne of God. Churches dedicated to Saint Ursula began to appear in various cities, and her name was included in the litanies and liturgical prayers of many dioceses. The Holy See officially recognized the veneration of Saint Ursula by including her name in the Roman martyrology, establishing October 21st as her liturgical feast day, commemorating the anniversary of her martyrdom. This papal recognition confirmed the legitimacy of popular devotion and facilitated the spread of her cult to all churches in Christendom. Successive popes granted various indulgences to those who visited the shrines dedicated to the holy martyr and devoutly participated in the ceremonies organized in her honor. During the Middle Ages, the figure of Saint Ursula achieved extraordinary popularity, manifesting not only in the religious sphere, but also in the arts, literature, and popular traditions. Numerous artists immortalized the most significant episodes of the saint's life and martyrdom in their works, while poets composed hymns and ballads celebrating her heroic virtues. Theatrical representations of her story became popular events, attracting crowds and serving as a means of evangelization and moral edification. This cultural diffusion greatly contributed to keeping the memory of Saint Ursula alive in the Christian consciousness of Europe. Chapter 10. Saint Angela Merici and the Company of Saint Ursula in the 16th century. As the Church navigated the turbulent period of the Protestant Reformation and urgently needed to renew its spiritual strength, divine providence raised up a holy woman in Italy, destined to revive and update the spirit of Saint Ursula for the needs of her time. Saint Angela Merici, born in Desenzano del Garda in 1474, experienced from her youth a special devotion to the Martyr of Cologne, whose heroic purity and total dedication to Christ deeply inspired her own search for Christian perfection. This admiration intensified when she received a mystical vision in which she beheld Saint Ursula surrounded by glorious virgins who encouraged her to found a new religious family. The heavenly vision that Saint Angela received was not an isolated event, but the culmination of a long process of spiritual maturation, during which she had understood the urgent need to provide Christian education to the young women of her era. In those times, female education was generally limited to basic domestic skills, while intellectual and spiritual education remained almost exclusively reserved for men. Saint Angela perceived with prophetic clarity that well-formed Christian mothers would be the best evangelizers of future generations, transmitting to their children not only the Catholic faith, but also the culture and values necessary to face the challenges of a transforming world. On November 25th, 1535, the feast day of Saint Catherine of Alexandria, Saint Angela Merici officially founded the Company of Saint Ursula in Brescia, initially gathering 28 young women who shared her ideal of consecration to God and educational service. The choice of the name was not accidental, for Saint Angela saw in the Martyr of Cologne the perfect model of consecrated virginity and courageous Christian witness that she wished to propose to her spiritual daughters. The new congregation was characterized by an innovative pastoral flexibility that allowed its members to live in their own homes while dedicating themselves to the education of the girls in their respective neighborhoods and parishes. The rule that St. Angela composed for her spiritual daughters admirably reflected the spirit of St. Ursula, emphasizing purity of heart, unwavering fidelity to Christ, and the courage necessary to bear Christian witness in a hostile world. The Ursulines, as they came to be known, committed themselves to living the evangelical counsels of poverty, chastity, and obedience, but adapted to the demands of their educational mission. Their apostolate focused especially on the integral formation of young women, providing them with both the religious instruction necessary to be good Christians and the academic knowledge that would prepare them to be competent mothers and educators. The growth of the Company of St. Ursula was extraordinarily rapid, spreading first throughout Italy and then to France, where it found especially fertile ground during the period of the Catholic Counter-Reformation. The French Ursulines developed such an effective educational system that they were soon requested by bishops from various dioceses to establish female colleges that rivaled in quality the best male institutions of the time. Their pedagogical method, based on maternal love rather than severity, and their personalized attention to each student, produced extraordinary results that contributed significantly to the renewal of Christian life in Catholic families. Thus, the spirit of St. Ursula found a new historical incarnation that infinitely multiplied the reach of her original testimony. Chapter 11. The Ursulines in the Modern World. The missionary expansion of the Ursuline sisters during the 17th and 18th centuries constituted one of the most extraordinary phenomena in the history of Catholic evangelization, carrying the spirit of St. Ursula to continents and cultures that the holy martyr could never have imagined from her distant Cornwall. When Catholic explorers and colonizers ventured to the Americas, they carried with them not only the ambition of material riches, but also the sincere desire to extend the kingdom of Christ to the new lands. The Ursulines responded generously to this missionary call, embarking on perilous journeys to establish schools and convents in territories where everything was yet to be built. In New France, what we know today as Canada, the Ursuline sisters established the first educational institutions for young women on the American continent, facing extreme climatic conditions and the initial hostility of some indigenous tribes. Their work wasn't limited to educating the daughters of French colonists, but extended admirably to the formation of young indigenous women, to whom they taught not only Christian doctrine, but also European domestic arts and the rudiments of writing. This work of enculturation represents one of the most beautiful examples of missionary adaptation, where the spirit of St. Ursula was embodied in new cultural forms without losing its evangelical essence. The 19th century brought new challenges and opportunities for the spiritual daughters of St. Ursula, especially with the Industrial Revolution and the massive migratory movements that transformed the social structure of Europe and America. The Ursulines demonstrated an extraordinary capacity for adaptation, establishing schools in the working-class neighborhoods of large industrial cities and accompanying Catholic immigrants in their process of integration into new societies. Their educational method evolved to respond to the changing needs of the era, incorporating new academic subjects and pedagogical techniques, but always maintaining as a central core the complete Christian formation of women. The two world wars of the 20th century tested the spiritual strength of the Ursulines in a similar way to how the barbarian invasions had tested the faith of St. Ursula in the 4th century. During these periods of tribulation, many Ursuline sisters gave heroic testimony of their faith, some even reaching martyrdom for protecting their students or for refusing to collaborate with totalitarian regimes. Their colleges frequently became shelters for political and racial refugees, demonstrating that the spirit of Christian charity, inherited from their holy founder, could manifest in new forms according to the historical circumstances. Today, the Ursuline sisters continue their educational mission on 5 continents, constantly adapting to the challenges of contemporary society, without ever renouncing the fundamental principles they inherited from Saint Ursula and Saint Angela Mercy. Their educational institutions have diversified to include everything from elementary schools in rural African villages to prestigious universities in large Asian metropolises. In each cultural context, the Ursulines seek to embody the ideal of the Christian woman that Saint Ursula represented in her time, strong in faith, pure in customs, courageous in the face of difficulties, and totally dedicated to the service of Jesus Christ. Their global presence constitutes a living testament to the fact that holiness transcends the barriers of time and space, inspiring new generations of Christians in every historical era. Chapter 12. Prayer to Saint Ursula. O Saint Ursula, most pure virgin and valiant martyr, who from your youth consecrated your heart to the heavenly bridegroom and remained faithful to this divine love until the shedding of your blood, we direct our supplications to you with the confidence of children who turn to a loving mother, you who knew the temptations of the world and family pressures, but knew how to keep the purity of your soul intact. Intercede for us before the throne of divine mercy, so that we too may have the necessary strength to resist the seductions of sin and remain faithful to our Christian commitments. Glorious martyr of Cologne, who preferred temporal death rather than betray your faith in Jesus Christ, grant us the grace to possess a religious conviction as solid as yours, capable of resisting all the trials and persecutions that may threaten our Catholic fidelity. In these difficult times, where so many voices rise against the Church and its teachings, we need the example of your unwavering firmness, so as not to be swept away by the currents of moral relativism and the aggressive secularism that characterize our era. Saint Ursula, special patron of consecrated young women and model for all souls who seek Christian perfection, protect with your maternal intercession the Ursuline sisters who continue your educational mission throughout the world. Bless their schools and universities, inspire their pedagogical methods, and make their work form true Christian women, capable of being the salt of the earth and the light of the world in their respective environments. Also help all Catholic educators to imitate your example of generous dedication to the service of youth. We especially ask you, O Saint Ursula, to intercede for the Christian families of our time, so that parents may find in your example the inspiration necessary to educate their children in the Catholic faith and in Christian virtues. May mothers learn from you to be valiant defenders of evangelical values in their homes, and may single young women find in your purity the model to live their state worthily, while awaiting the divine call to marriage or consecrated life. Finally, dear Saint Ursula, we entrust to you our personal and family needs, our worries and tribulations, trusting that your maternal heart understands our weaknesses and has compassion for our miseries. Obtain for us from the Sacred Heart of Jesus, your eternal bridegroom, the graces necessary to grow in holiness, to persevere in good, and to one day enjoy with you the celestial beatitude where there will be no more tears or suffering. Amen.